Hello everyone, my name is Cameron Riddell, and you might not know this, but we at Don't Use This Code offer seminars, trainings, and consulting. Oh wait, maybe you did know that, but what you probably didn't know is that we also facilitate intergalactic trade. That's right, get ready to visit our Star Trader dataset and create some fast-paced reports using pandas in matplotlib. There's so much to cover, but first, have a short time together today, so I want to share with you our dilemma. I'm flying solo today. That's because my boss, who's also the head of our intergalactic trade unit, is currently in London for PyData London, and he has asked me to provide a brief report for the traders that I oversee. That's our team of 4 of Alice, Bob, Charlie, and Dana. We want to assess the current health of our trading branch. Now, for our traders and overall for our trading branch, James has asked me to generate one report that answers these 2 questions. Did we do well? And which person on my team has done the best to date? With these questions in mind, let's go ahead and dive right in. Before we talk about the problem any further, we know that we want to make a single page data visualization or a report that answers those 2 questions that we had. But before we can even do that, I just want to share with you just something very brief on why do we even incorporate visualizations in the first place. First and foremost, visualizations are a great way to view all of the data in a way that summary statistics simply do not suffice. If I were to take this data set, and if you're familiar with Anscombe's quartet, you might know exactly what's coming up. But just by taking a look at this data set, well, I can summarize this. I can take the mean and the standard deviation of every single column, just like so, using a little bit of pandas. And you can see just a little bit that the means for all of my x's, that's any column that ends with the suffix x, is the same as the mean for every x column, and the mean of my y's are the same for every other y column. Same thing with our standard deviations. While they're not always numerically the exact same, little bit of floating point rounding issues here, but you can see that the mean and standard deviation are 2 very standard descriptive statistics are telling us that these pairs of x and y values are the same. Let's go ahead and throw this into a visualization that I can work with just so we can see what these data look like. For that, I'll use a little bit of Seaborn, and I'll use matplotlib because we need to show our plot at the end, right? And if you're familiar with creating data visualizations, we'll know that when we use tools like Seaborn, it expects a very specific input format of our data, so we'll need to go ahead and massage our data set to get it into the right form. Taking a look back here at our data set, we can see that we have this kind of oddly wide formatted data. We'll need to separate each of these sections, each of the pairs of x and y, so that they're easier to work with. Probably the most straightforward way of doing that is just replacing these columns all together with an out-of-band encoding, separating the Roman numerals from the x and y. And how I can do that, I can take the columns and then take the string and take everything up to the last position. And you'll see that I get out here just those values. And then if I take the actual last position, I get the x or the y. We can very easily throw this into a multi-index. And when we do this, I'll go ahead and grab both of those here, throw these into a list because that's what multi-index expects. And we'll go ahead and add our open and close parens there. Now let's take another look at the head of our data frame. Multi-index, this should be from arrays. I can never remember the original constructor of a multi-index. That's why we have all these great class methods from arrays, from tuples, from product. But you can see I now have an out-of-band encoding. Let's give these some names. Our top level is our quartet or our numeral. I'll just call it quartet. And our second level is our variable. So I'll just call that var for short. You can see I've given those names. And now I'm just one stack operation away from the result, or from the long format that Seaborn expects. So go ahead and stack that quartet there. All right, we're looking good. Yes. Now from Seaborn, we have our LM plot. Stack that back. Okay. And this should be LM plot, or X is just the variable X, or Y is the variable Y. Our column is our, what was that called? I believe quartet. Our column wrap, right? If we want to actually make a layout of these two things, or of these four things, we'll do a column wrap of 2. So we just see two columns per row. And we'll just pass our data in. We need to reset the index because Seaborn does not look into the index. And let's go ahead and use matplotlib show here. All right, we're looking good. I'll just go ahead and increase this font size. We'll get rid of the error bars here, or the error bands. I don't think they make much sense as we don't have a ton of data. So I'll go ahead and drop the CI to none, and then import some RC parameters. Always the most reliable way of bumping up your font size. Let's go ahead and use something like 16. So what I told you earlier is that numerically, these 4 data sets had the exact same mean on the X values and the exact same mean on the Y values, and same with their standard deviations. But you can see that they all represent very, very distinct data sets. For instance, our quartet in the top left, number 1, well, that's a nice linear relationship between X and Y. 10 data points, is it the most robust? No, but if we look, this makes sense. Now, quartet number 2, we can very clearly see that this is not a linear relationship at all. This is, in fact, a nonlinear relationship. And so maybe, even though it has the same mean and standard deviation as quartet number 1, this is a very different data set. And you can see that this pattern repeats. Quartet 3, there's a single outlier that's causing our regression to look the exact same as the other data sets. And same thing for quartet 4, except the outlier is located on the x-axis instead of the y-axis. But you get the idea here that it is important to visualize as much as your data as possible when you are trying to understand it. Aggregations and summary statistics alone are simply not enough, and they need to be supplemented, in my opinion, by some good data visualizations. With that being said, let's cover, well, for these 2 questions, how has trading performed overall, and which person on my team has done the best, let's figure out what we should report in the first place. Now, I have thought about this, and I've thought about this a fair bit. What I want to share with you is that whenever you're creating a report, you'll need to first identify, right, the KPIs, the key performance indicators that you want to report on. And then if you're incorporating visualizations, any type of layout, it's very important that you don't start in the weeds of the data, that you don't start with any single visualization. What I would encourage you to start with is a tool like PowerPoint. And now, why would I say PowerPoint? I'm not saying create your charts in PowerPoint, but instead, I would advocate for creating a layout. If you're planning on creating anything complex, go ahead and use PowerPoint, draw the shapes of all your figures, where you'll be putting things, draw the entire layout, and then from there, start populating what those figures will look like. Here you can see that I just have a few chart titles. And for the most part, I haven't annotated them too much, but you can see down here, for instance, I've included, well, what should the x-axis be? What should the y-axis be? Should there be any element of stacking or faceting involved here? And with the answers to those questions, I can start really detailing out what this should look like. And here's a couple guidelines for creating reports like this. The top left corner is going to be the most viewed corner of your report or your dashboard. So you should always have the highest level of aggregation, the biggest summary statistic that you can, that if somebody just spends 5 seconds looking at this, they see that number and they have the gist of the overall direction where things are going. Next, I have a comparison. I'm providing a little bit of supplemental context to that value. So in this year-over-year profit chart or this year-over-year market value chart, what I'm going to be doing is isolating, well, where did this large aggregate number come from and where are we at currently? How does that compare to other years or other data points that I might have that are comparable? Then on the bottom, I'm displaying another KPI instead of market value. I'm displaying portfolio diversity. The x-axis here will be the date. The y-axis will be the proportion of the asset or the raw volume of a given asset. And these will be stacked. So you can think that I'm going to have a stacked area chart or a stacked bar chart. And each color of stacking will represent a different asset. Then that is my group summary, everything on the left. On my right-hand side, well, for question number 2, I need to figure out how are each individual trader doing. And in order to do that, I'm going to assess, well, how have they done the past year? And I would use something like a point plot here. So market value contribution by trader. I would have their beginning versus their end, maybe the beginning of the current year to the end of the current year. We can see how they have done for this so far for this year. Then on the bottom, we have portfolio diversity. You can start to see the horizontal layout here. The top row is market value and the bottom row is portfolio diversity. And on the left, we have group summary, and on the right, we have trader. So we're going to be doing a very similar thing that we did for the portfolio diversity in the group level, just at the trader level instead. So let's go ahead and take a look at these data. Now, I've done a little bit of pre-processing just to make these data easier to work with. And what I've done here is a little bit of aggregation. Our columns, equipment through uranium, those are all market volume. So how much medicine did Alice trade on the 1st of 2019? Well, Alice traded 110 units of medicine, and that cost about 27,000 credits. And so you can start seeing how many credits were exchanged and how much was bought. In this case, medicine is negative, so Bob sold 240 units or volumes of medicine and gained this many credits. So let's go ahead and start creating our report. We will, of course, be needing matplotlib, our tried and true matplotlib. I'll also go ahead and grab our data set here. So we'll start like that. And we'll need this as well. So we have our data set. Let's grab our matplotlib imports. Since I know the layout that I'm using in advance, I'll use a subplot mosaic, and we'll grab show. We'll probably need to be coming back to these imports, but I'll add them in as I need them. Oh, and last but not least, right, we'll want to create our fonts and our parameters for styling. So I'll go ahead and start with that. That's always an easy place to start. I think the default font size in matplotlib is just a little too small. And then let's go ahead and create our mosaic. Now, if you haven't used subplot mosaic, I think it's very handy for laying out complex layouts of charts. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to supply the title to each chart. So this first one in our top left is our current market value. Then we have our markets, and I have the layout right here for me. So that's market value year over year. Having that layout is very handy to reference a lot. Trader market value for the right-hand column. Then we get to the next row. Portfolio diversity, make sure I spell that right. And now this will actually be the same, right? Since in my layout, this spans 2 columns. So this is, again, portfolio diversity. And then our last column was trader level portfolio diversity. So let's go ahead and make our fig, our axes dictionary, subplot mosaic, feed my mosaic in there. And let's go ahead and just show what we have right now. Subplot mosaic. Let me make sure we have the right, matplotlib.pyplot. Grab subplot mosaic and then fix my typo here. All right, we have ourselves actually a nice layout. One of the tricks that I love using for subplot mosaic is that by using the titles right here, I don't need to do any work. I can simply iterate over each title. Since this is just a dictionary, mapping the titles to each of these elements, each of these axes, I'll go ahead and just add my labels here. And I've been on a kind of a kick lately. I don't love the center-aligned labels or titles, so I'll force this to be left flushed to the top left of each plot. And I think we are starting to do quite well here. Okay, Next up, let's tackle our very first plot. This one here in the top left, our current market value. So this should just be a single measure, a single value, or text label in this case, that summarizes how are we doing. So we'll grab our very first, I'll just put a few comments here, or a few lines here to separate this. So we have our first axis object, and what we're going to be doing is we're going to be adding a text. And now this text will be located perfectly center, and we might move this around, but perfectly center on our axes, and then we'll feed in our text. And I'll leave this blank just for now, since I can always compute the measurement later and come back to it. Now, if you're not familiar with adding text, this adds text in terms of data coordinates. I don't necessarily want this in data coordinates because there won't be actual data plotted against these axes. So instead, I'm going to supply a transform here, and I'll use its own fractional coordinate system. And you can tap into that by using transaxes. So now instead of 0.5, 0.5 in data space, we're doing half the way along my x-axis and then half the way up my y-axis. And we'll make this centered. Instead of left align, we'll set our vertical alignments. This should be the default baseline. It's the bottom of the text, right? Not the very bottom of the text, but the baseline, so to speak. And then size, we'll bump this up, make this nice and big. Okay, so now we've added some text there. Let's go ahead and compute our actual value. We can use an F string here, and this should just be our clean trades, and we'll grab what column? It should be the credit column there. Credit, and we just take the sum, and we'll just do that for now. We can always come back and clean this up. All right, well, it doesn't look like things are going well for intergalactic traders. We have lost a lot of money. And this is current market value. So this is the money, and if we sold our assets today, maybe we're just holding on to a bunch of assets for the future, but we'll let our report figure that out for us. So let's keep moving forward. I can do things to clean this up, but I'll do that in a second pass. I'd rather get all of my charts out first and then focus on the actual aesthetics. Next up, I wanted a year-over-year analysis of 2019 versus the current year, 2020. And so let's go ahead and look at how we do that. I'll need to compute just a little bit of data transformation here to make the data easily workable. And for those of you who forget, like myself, what the data actually look like, let's go ahead and print our clean trades. Okay, so we have our dates as our index. We'll need to resample across that. We don't care about each individual player at this point, so we can aggregate past them. So what this says to me is that we need to use clean trades, and you'll see I'm starting to enter this quick iteration cycle where all I want to do is just compute some new measurements and assess whether or not that's what I wanted. So we'll pass in a grouper object here, and then I should just need the credit and then the sum of that. Okay, so now we have the monthly current market value here. You can see some months are doing better than others, but now we need to facet this out. Because I know I'm making a group bar chart, making a group bar chart in pure matplotlib is not a very fun task. It's actually quite tricky. So I'm going to lean down into Seaborn to do this group bar chart for me. And that means I need to play a little bit by Seaborn's rules by having my data in the correct format, right? A nice long format, but we also need our columns as well. So in this case, I want my x-axis to be each month, and then I want a grouping factor on the year. So I want to compare this row here, 2019 January 1st, to this row here, 2020 January. So let's go ahead and we'll do that. I'll just need to assign a couple of columns here, and we'll have our month, and this should be lambda d, just like that. We'll grab the dates, which is just the index. And so what we'll need here, I can use a dot month. And I'll go ahead and just run that, make sure everything looks like it worked. It gives me, that does indeed give me the month number. And then we'll grab the year. We can do the same thing. And now we can perform a very easy seaborn plot using these data. So I'll go ahead and assign this out. Just like that. All right, so let's grab from seaborn, import bar plot, very aptly named. And then let's see, our X is our month, our Y is our credits, and our hue in this case will be the year, and the data is this. Okay, and then we'll just need to show that, and I need to give this an axis to actually plot into. So let me go grab my market value year over year. Let's see what this looks like now. Okay, so this is actually, it's following the form that I want. Things I would change, right? We have overlapping just a little bit on the Y label there, but I might remove the Y label or change it for something else. The months being labeled 1 through 12, I'm not too big of a fan of, so we can very, very quickly fix that. This should be a string formatted time. Let's just get the short name of each of these months. That shouldn't be .month there, .index, string from time. That's a date time index, should have this method, strf time. All right, so we have those. I'll need to change the orientation of those just a little bit, but I think we can come back and worry about the aesthetics later. Let's get all of our data on these plots. Next up, I wanted to make a point plot comparing each of my traders from the first year to the start of this year to the end of this year. Let's go ahead and take a look at how we might do that. I'll again need to just work with these data a little bit. So let's go ahead and get back into our data iteration loop here. I have my clean trades, and we'll do a group by, I want a yearly look at this. I'll just grab the previous year and the current year. And so we'll use actually the same kind of group or approach, since that worked well up there. And instead of on the month, we're going to operate on the year. We'll grab the player, we'll grab the credits, just like that. And we'll also need to do this on the player level, so not just every year, but we want within each year, aggregate on the player. There's a little bit of the power of this grouper object when performing group by operations. Okay, so now we have the date, we have the player, and we have how much they made. Now we just need to combine this so that it's easy to plot with. So we'll unstack this date column here, and then since I'm only interested in the year portion of this date, I'll actually just use a rename and pass a lambda into here. Should be a lambda call, and let's see, this should be a call, I believe just call.year will actually just give me the year, since these should all be pandas datetime objects. That looks good. So those are integers representing the year. Go ahead and add a little separator in there. And these, let's call these trader value changes. Okay. And then now we get back to adding to our plot. Let's go ahead and grab that title, which is all the way here. Let's fix that. Okay. And what we're going to do, we'll need to iterate over these. Since I want to plot both of Alice's points at once, I'll just iterate over the rows. So this should be for player, row, and trader value changes, .iter rows. Just like that. And then what we'll do is we'll do trader, that's this plot name, and we're going to do a .plot. This is where things get a little bit tricky. So our X is going to be our years. So this should be 2019. And I'll use this as a string just so we don't get a numeric x-axis here. And then our Y is the row values for these. So I'll just grab these. And these will actually be integers because that's what our pandas data frame thinks it is. just like that. Okay, and I think that's good. Let's see what this looks like. Okay, we have our points. The colors make absolutely no sense, so we'll need to spruce that up as well. We'll just make them all gray for now. And then what we can do is we'll add a marker to represent that's where our actual data are. And then I can use a quick trick to add some labels to these. We'll annotate these, and we'll actually use the annotation at the 2020 level. And so this should be 2020, just like that. We have to pass our text. So our text is our player, and then we take as a tuple the X and Y coordinate. So this would be 2020, and then this will be the row value of 2020. Let's see if this works just as a quick check. And then we can move this. This looks actually quite good. We can move this. We'll need to offset the XY text here. And we'll move this just 5 units to the right. We'll give this a center vertical alignment. And that should be it. We just need to specify what coordinate space our text is in. This should be offset points, right? We don't want 5 data points to the right. We want, or up. This should be 5, 0. Now that I look at it. And offset points, we just have a quick error. I'll swap this 5 right there. And we're looking good. We've labeled this plot. I'll go ahead and let's turn off these spines. I think they're just a little distracting. I think it's always safe, or for the most part safe, to turn off the top and the right. Can replot that now. Okay, and we're building this report. Let's go ahead and see if we can tackle our lower left-hand corner plots. So this is our portfolio diversity. Just like that. And we'll need to transform this just a little bit. I'll need to separate our buys from our sells. So this should be clean trades. And we'll want to aggregate across the date, just like that. And then we want to track this over time. So I'll take the cumulative sum. And I'm not necessarily interested in the credits. I'm just interested in the assets here. So we'll drop the credit column. This might not be the best pandas code, but I'm getting through this. So our buys pretty much are anywhere where we have a value that's greater than 0. And the reason I'm doing this is because I'm going to create a stack plot, which is just a stacked area chart. We have to transpose this because this gets converted into a NumPy and D array by matplotlib. And our labels are our columns, just like this. And let's see what this looks like here. Columns, C-O-L-U-M-N-S. And then typos abound. Labels just like that, and that should be all of the arguments I need to stack plot. So it looks pretty good. You can see that we're trading whatever red and green are. We can always we'll add our legend here. But let's go ahead, we'll repeat this for the cells, for things that are sold, and we'll make this less than or equal to just like that. And this will actually be the exact same. Now we're just building the negative portion of our, I'll just swap this. We're just plotting the bottom half of our chart so we can see all of the debt that we accrue. And we'll just need to grab a color map to normalize, make all of these the same thing. And colors equals color maps. We'll use square brackets here. What color palette do I want to use? Let's use tab 10, just like that. And we'll just supply the same colors to each of these. The order of the columns should be the same, so we should be good here. Color maps, tab 10. Looks good. And we just need the dot colors off of the actual listed color map here. And now the colors on the top and bottom are the same. We'll just add our legend and wrap this up. Now, you can see the legend is a little repeated, so what I can do is just remove this labels here, and I think we end on something that gets us most of the way to our goal. Clearly, we set ourselves a very large goal here, but we made it through getting 4 out of 5 pieces of data onto our report. But I think what I want to do here is just talk about some of the aesthetic changes that I would make, and I can share those aesthetic changes with you on Discord as well. So for our current market value, we clearly don't need the X and Y axis. I would completely remove these. Since we were making negative dollars, I would remove this decimal point, maybe divide by 1,000, add a 1,000 specifier there, and I would paint the background of this in a soft red. Red meaning, right, we're not doing too well as a trading firm. Then in this chart over here in the center, I would rotate these tick labels just a little bit. I would probably flatten this column, this legend out to have 2 columns. And then over on this chart on the right, I would change the y-axis labels. Instead of being in 1e to the 6 units, I would probably change that to like a thousands formatter. For this chart here, I would probably bring the edge of the chart in and then put the legend to the right of the chart, such that we don't see this odd overlap of the legend and the data. And then for this portfolio diversity, we would just be building a stacked bar chart that would look very similar to the stacked area chart, but represent our traders. I would also probably clean up this x-axis being the dates and also squeeze the margins of this chart so that there's no empty space between our starting date and our ending date. But I think that does it for the aesthetic changes and what I would do to these plots if we had a little bit more time. This was as fast as I could live code us through some data visualizations, and I think we did a fairly good job of creating a lot of decently thought out visualizations. While there might have been more tweaks that we can do to these plots, I hope you have learned how to create plans for your visualizations, right? Starting in PowerPoint or some drawing tool is a great way to think through what you want to do, and then use matplotlib to bring those visualizations to life. I want to thank everyone for attending, and I hope to see you all again soon.